I'm going to read up.
Wow. We're studying up, reading?
Yeah, I'm going to take the test later, and I just want to make sure I pass.
Okay. I mean, we definitely have to train for the future.
Train for the future, my friend.
Wow. Okay.
I think that's the Granada TV footage, kind of the only interview or documentary ever done on Hubbard with that British Granada TV.
Yeah, it was Granada TV. I cut that part out. So
okay,
so I was like, it was already a long enough intro. I'm like, let me trim off the start of that because that's just insane. But great subject for the day. To get us started, though, we still have a sponsor.
We do?
ExpressVPN, yes. And, well, considering the topic we're dealing with here, it's sometimes good to protect your data and encrypt it, especially if you're doing research from, shall we say, a group that's known for hiring private detectives and things of that sort. You might want to mask your IP address when you're tooling around online doing the research, because
now you tell me.
Now I tell you. Well, you know what? We're getting there. We're getting there. But the cool thing is that if you want to keep up with where L. Ron was, you might even be able to wind up in a server near where he sailed.
Oh, wow.
Who knows? Anywhere in the world, you can go. You can watch content everywhere. It's super, super helpful. And thanks to ExpressVPN for sponsoring the show. We do have a link where you get 3 months free down below in the description. It's a pin chat, and there should be a pinned comment sometime later when I'm able to actually add a comment to the show after it's done. But
okay.
Thank you again to ExpressVPN. They're really, really happy with us. And hey, if you guys help us out and go there, who knows? We might still get some support from them.
Okay. Well, that's promising.
All right. Yeah. Mr. X got it. See?
Mr. X did it already?
That's right.
Well, that was quick. Fletcher Prouty on board. You know,
and apparently, Xenu also appreciates
Xenu loves ExpressVPN. Xenu, I mean, I don't know if it goes to other galaxies, but apparently it does. Xenu, what is this one? VPN won't mess with your Thetan levels. Well, I mean, it's hard to get those Thetan levels reduced and climb the bridge to OT 7 and 8, as some of our viewers are apparently well aware where this is going. It's been a long time. I haven't looked at Scientology in a long time. I had to go into the vault, my own vault, not the Scientology vault. By the way, out in Hemet, where there's a lot of fires this week, they have a vault below the earth where they keep the Hubbard original text and writings in case there's a nuclear war. That the writings and not so much them, but the writings of Hubbard would survive a nuclear war. And the vault is there for that reason out in Hemet.
Good times.
It's also the place of gold, compound gold, which we will explore. This is going to be a 2-part episode because there's so much material here.
Yeah, I had no idea.
Yeah, no, I do. That's why I've been putting this off, because it's so billionaire subscribing. Yeah, if you could see my own contract, which I sent to Hunley. I don't know if you could show a picture of that, Eric, of the contract. You sign a billion-year contract with Scientology with the Sea Org, which I joined because I was in the Sea Scouts originally as a boy. My father was in the Navy, just like Hubbard's father was in the Navy, served in Guam in World War I. But the billion-year contract, which you see here, 2 of my sponsors there, Edgar Winter
was a sponsor, and Paul Haggis.
Paul Haggis, yeah, you have to have 2 guys to co-sign you into the Sea Org. I have a little less than 1 billion years left on the contract, so that's something to keep in mind for the Sea Org. And we're going to get into that Sea Org, what the Sea Org is, in a couple of minutes. But the reality of it is that Hubbard starts out, first of all, he's from a town called Tilden, Nebraska. And he's not from the East Coast. He's not from the West Coast. He ends up going around the world. His father's in the Navy in World War I. He ends up, his mother going to Guam and visiting him. Tilden, Nebraska is a weird little town. The only reason I know Tilden, Nebraska is because the only other famous person ever to come out of Tilden, Nebraska is Richie Ashburn, who was a Phillies center fielder who at the end of his career was on the worst team in Major League Baseball, the 1962 Mets, for which I got a Richie Ashburn bat as a kid. And this is my connection to Hubbard through Tilden, Nebraska. Richie Ashburn went to the Hall of Fame as a Philly, then became a Philly announcer, but he had to spend the last year of his life on the Mets, which was an expansion team. And he had to suffer that year tortured by the organization. And I ended up with a Richie Ashburn bat, who is, the only other famous person from Tilden. But the fact of the matter is that this guy, L. Ron Hubbard, came from a naval background. And that will be why he joins the Navy. And we're going to get into some of this right now about his naval background, because it is extremely colorful. It takes him down to Australia. It takes him around the world. It takes him to South America. It takes him initially. Yeah, this is, I believe, his first boat.
First boat.
Which one is this?
First boat.
It was the first one. Okay. So he is removed. He doesn't get into the Naval Academy, but he somehow becomes a junior lieutenant, I guess because of his father being in the Navy. And he ends up being the commander of two ships, I guess after, World War II, Pearl Harbor, they took anyone. But we're gonna get to that in a second. But first, I want to go back to his Pulp Fiction writing in the 30s before we get to the war years. He writes for his high school newspaper. He, not unlike myself, a paper called The Hatchet or something, and he publishes this stuff. And then he gets into Pulp Fiction writing. Now, the Pulp Fiction writing in the 30s, which he cranks out, is about a penny a word. So maybe he'll make $100, from these issues. And you could see the one on the right, for instance. He's teamed up with Isaac Asimov, who was a close friend, and Robert Heinlein, and a bunch of these other guys. And he becomes very prolific. He has a special typewriter, which I didn't realize existed, a Remington, that actually had special keys installed for writers where you could hit a key and it says but and the and as, to really speed you up, Eric, in terms of writing. I mean,
that sounds like a stenographer or a court reporter system, because they have like a system in there where it's like partial words.
Well, these were keys that actually said these little words on them, and he wrote so fast that he would sweat onto the keyboards and the paper, and he put in butcher block rolls, not unlike Jack Kerouac did, and would just keep typing nonstop for days. And I believe my theory is that he got into amphetamines, not unlike Kerouac, and was able to write for days. And eventually, I think he developed amphetamine psychosis. But before that, he goes to the dentist and he has dental surgery where I think he has nitrous oxide. And that is what inspires him to begin to create the book Dianetics. He said that this was such an incredible life-altering event of him in the dental chair that I can only think it was nitrous oxide. He claims to have died for 8 minutes. This will lead eventually to 1950 to Dianetics. But just to go back to the 1930s, where he's doing this Pulp Fiction writing, he becomes the world's leading publisher of books as a writer, with over 1,000 published, according to the Guinness Book of World Records. This is before Dianetics, before Scientology is even created. Hubbard is a beast.
John, I had John Atack on a while back, who's on the special list, and he was saying that Hubbard had a condition, like where he had to write all the time. It was like a weird disease type of thing.
I had that too. I had this stomach condition where I had to write because my doctor said I had to eat every day. So the rare stomach condition forced me to write to get paid. That's an old writer's joke.
I got you.
There's writers somewhere laughing in St. Louis somewhere for that.
Probably.
Yeah. But nevertheless, he bangs out all of this stuff, and he is completely narcissistic even at that age. I mean, he says, I'm going to be the biggest writer. My name is going to be emblazoned. I'm going to be the biggest name in the history of the world. And the other writers who are not, slouches, including Asimov and Heinlein, are just going, he's their friend, but they see that he's nuts from day one. And He's obviously got some screws loose. Some people say that he invented Dianetics and Scientology to treat himself, that all of this was not a hustle. It was him treating his own mental illness. There's some argument to be made for that, which we'll get into a little later.
As much as I hate psychologists, could be.
Well, he doesn't hate them initially because Dianetics, which we'll get into, is completely filled with Freudian stuff and psychology stuff. And he sends it to the American Psychiatric Association to be published, sends it to the AMA. There's a lot of scientific stuff in there. And his hatred of psychiatry and psychology doesn't come on until years later. And I believe he starts out trying to be their friend, or having, his stuff published by them, actually. He's really enamored. The book itself, which we'll catch up to because it's 1950, the book. He goes to war first, and then we're going to go to Pasadena. But very scientific book. I mean, it's denounced by some scientists, but other scientists rave about it as a science of the mind, Eric. So it was a split decision on whether this was a real scientific manual or not. But not considered completely crackpot by the scientific community. The engrams that he talks about, which we'll get into, had already been established by 1904 that the body had engrams in it, which are basically repressed memories of childhood trauma, to put it into Dr. Drew terms today. That's what an engram is, which had already been established in the early 1900s and used scientifically. He didn't come up with that for Dianetics. He took that from some other studies, but
Freud.
Okay, so
memories.
What's that?
Freud did a lot on repressed memories.
Yeah, no, the book is very Freudian. I mean, this whole anti-psychiatric thing comes up much later in Scientology, but not in 1950 when he's writing Dianetics, which he claims to have written in 3 weeks. Dianetics is really an extension of a manuscript called Excalibur that he never got published. And he said if you read Excalibur, people who read it jumped out the window and killed themselves immediately. He said anyone who read Excalibur immediately died. That's how powerful it was. So he feared anyone reading Excalibur. It's a whole separate story, but Excalibur becomes Dianetics by 1950. He had written Excalibur in 1949 or something. But getting back to the war years, where he gets this ship, which you showed before. We could show that ship. The first one, the one that goes up to Oregon. He takes that ship, which is outfitted with guns and this is the first one. Okay. This one, he's relieved of his command. This is not the one that's the sub chaser. He eventually goes to school. He goes to naval school to become an intelligence officer, by the way, oddly enough. I don't know if people know that. He did not want to be a ship commander, and you could see why. If you read the reports about his military career, all of the reports say this man, essentially in military language, say this man should not be left alone in the command of a vessel. He'd be better served being on a larger ship where he could be observed by other officers. That seems to be the thrust of the reports on Hubbard as a ship commander. So they take this fishing boat, essentially, and they outrig it with guns, and you'll see a couple there. He's relieved of his command pretty quickly on this one. But the the second one, which was the one he took up to Oregon, that was this one here. Yeah. The 815. He takes the PC 815 up to Oregon, and off the coast of Oregon, he engages battle with Japanese subs that he says are right below him, dropping depth charges, calling in Navy blimps, Coast Guard and other PC boats to come in, and three others show up, and they're all bombing this Japanese sub underneath off the coast of Oregon. Unfortunately, there is no Japanese sub, and he goes into battle with the Japanese for 72 hours in the same spot, sinking these Japanese subs that don't exist. And the only reason we know this is because of the naval reports that were written up afterwards, saying there were no Japanese subs. And after the war, the British and the Americans got a hold of the naval records of the Japanese to prove there were no Japanese submarines off the coast of Oregon. So we know that for a fact now, despite what Scientology would have us believe about the war record of Hubbard, who then takes the ship down to San Diego, where he's based in San Diego, and begin to launch artillery into the territorial waters of Mexico. And this was frowned upon.
Wonder why.
This was frowned upon by the nation of Mexico, who filed complaints against Hubbard, who was removed from his second command as a naval commander at this time.
What was his highest achieved rank? Did he make lieutenant commander?
Lieutenant commander. Started out as a lieutenant, a junior lieutenant.
Ensign, then lieutenant.
No, he never entered. He started out as a lieutenant, a junior lieutenant, and then became lieutenant commander.
Well, ensign's the lowest lieutenant. That's the starting rank in the Navy.
Ensign with him in the literature. It says lieutenant, and then lieutenant commander. But that being said, he ends up, after he is taken from this command, in a military hospital in San Diego with all these imaginary illnesses. And he later writes that he did this to escape punishment by the naval brass for doing what he did. So he fakes all of these colitis, eye injuries, back injuries, but he also will later fake his entire military record, claiming he had all kinds of medals and everything else. He ends up in Australia at one point and claims to have been machine gunned in the back by the Japanese in the jungle, and ends up, you can't make this up, ends up being machine gunned in the back by the Japanese, getting on a life raft in the middle of a monsoon and somehow making it back to the vessel, surviving a Japanese attack. And he claimed to have a Purple Heart, which he didn't have. He claimed to have a bunch of other medals, and he really only had 3 medals, for showing up medals, those regular medals. But he, not unlike our friend LBJ, there's very similarities.
Contemporaries, really.
Yeah, they're very similar in their storytelling. Let me just put it mildly. They seem to be pathological storytellers of false stories. And this is a guy with red hair and green eyes. I don't know if you've ever seen someone with red hair and green eyes. They're kind of freaky looking. You know what I mean? They kind of.
Mark doesn't like gingers very much.
No, it's not a question of ginger. The guy just looked like a different kind of being. Let me put it that way. And he, the war ends. He joins the Naval Reserves. He doesn't really do much except in terms of Naval Reserves, but he now comes out to California. He, after the war, he goes on board a ship and sails to Europe before he gets to California. And he tries to do some business in France, where he is convicted of fraud and absentia. He then lands in Florida and tries to get involved with a town that'll later be involved in Scientology, called Clearwater, Florida. He leaves Clearwater, Florida. He's kind of a grifter and a con man at this point. You know, he's kind of grifting, conning, not making money. He's got multiple, he's got a wife that he marries in Oregon. He then comes out to California, and I think in 1945, 46, 47, he hooks up with Jack Parsons, who lives in the family mansion. Here's Jack Parsons of JPL fame. He hooks up, and they become best friends. This is they really become best buds. And Parsons, who lives in South Pass in a mansion, will of course be famous for JPL and rockets and everything else. And I don't really want to get into Parsons that much because he's going to get his own episode of America's Untold Stories, deservedly so, because Parsons is a freak. He doesn't live that long. I think he gets blown up in 1953. I think he blows himself to smithereens in 52. I'm sorry. And he's only 37, Parsons, but Parsons, fascinating character for another episode of America's Untold Stories. But Parsons is working indirectly with Aleister Crowley, who's based in England, and they write back and forth all the time because Crowley and Parsons have OTO, this religious sex magic religious cult. There's a great picture of Crowley in his headgear.
His Golden Dawn.
Yeah. Golden Dawn. So Crowley, and he's kind of directing Parsons on how to run this religion from afar. And the religion involves what Crowley calls sex magic. And there's orgies, there's rituals, there's they're trying to impregnate a woman named to bring the goddess Babylon down and create a spawn of Satan. So Hubbard shows up and he moves right into the mansion to live. You could rent a room in the mansion from Parsons, but there were two demands from Parsons. You had to be an atheist and you had to be a bohemian to get a rented room in the mansion. The mansion he got from his parents, who were very wealthy, super wealthy kid, inherited the mansion from them. And not too far from here is where he lived. And I lived in Pasadena near the mansion originally. But so Parsons begins to have these rituals at night, and they don't know about it. But in 1939, Parsons is a Marxist, and he begins to practice Marxism while working and developing rockets. And this becomes an issue. He has a Marxist communist overlord friend who's steering him, but he never joins the American Communist Party, Parsons, to his credit, and eventually denounces Marxism, I think in 1941. But at the beginning, he is a Marxist. So, but some of these people saw through the bullshit, and Parsons was one of them. But he doesn't mean he wasn't into sex magic, which is a whole separate episode, and he will explain sex magic at that time. But Hubbard shows up. Parsons leaves his own wife and develops a relationship with her younger sister, of course, as men do, and not unlike some, maybe like Hunter Biden or somebody like that, I think. Anyway, so he now has Sarah, who is his girlfriend. She is stolen from him by Hubbard. Sarah and Hubbard become a couple. Sarah pretty soon on, marries Hubbard. Sarah is kind of a grifter. She's one who wants to be the goddess, the sex goddess that they worship. So she volunteers to be impregnated with the spawn of Satan. I'm not sure how that's done. Not exactly sure.
Well, then.
Right. There's some sex magic involved in that, which we'll get into a little later. But they form a company, the three of them, something Winds or something sailing company. And what he professes, Hubbard, is to get these yachts from Miami and sail them to their rightful owners in some other place. And remember, it used to be this company, Eric, where you would drive someone's car across the country. It was like a rental thing, like a drive. If you needed to go across the country, people had cars that they wanted you to drive, that they didn't want to drive.
Sure.
Okay. Is that Sarah?
Yeah, Sarah Northrop.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. So Sarah, yeah, she was interesting. Sarah marries Hubbard. But Hubbard is still married to his other wife in Oregon, who's got a daughter up there. So now he's a bigamist. But Sarah, Hubbard, and Parsons form a company. And what it was, to start the company, the guy who had the money was Parsons. So Parsons put all his savings into this company and was ripped off by Sarah and Hubbard, who got a boat and sailed away in the middle of the night. And Parsons had to sell his mansion to recoup his losses to Hubbard. And that was the end of his relationship with L. Ron Hubbard. And all the other authors talked about Hubbard, Heinlein and Asimov, saying he's a con man and a grifter and he's going to come for you. I told you he was going to do this. He ripped off Jack Parsons and he sailed away, with Sarah. And later on, he has a kid with her. He then, she sues him for divorce. She declares in her divorce declaration that he's totally mentally insane, that he beat her up, tied her up, tortured her, took the kid to Cuba, where he said the kid was dead. Then he told her the kid was alive, but he would cut her up into pieces, all this crazy crap about. She eventually did get custody of her daughter, but she had to write a statement, simple, short statement to get custody of her daughter. L. Ron Hubbard is the smartest man in the world.
God.
Right. He was the most gentle, normal person I've ever met and one of the greatest men of all time. That's what she had to write. So she said, screw it. I'm just going to write this thing to get my daughter and get out of this mess, which she did. And that was what he extracted from her, because she was making claims in public that reached the newspapers, by the way, that there was things like, is L. Ron Hubbard insane? That was in newspapers and magazines.
Wow. So this is pretty close to, this is a few years after that, but pretty close to this time in his life, right?
This looks like Dianetics time.
It is. So we're still a little before.
Okay, so he begins with her. He begins to live off of her relatives, and he picks up another girl who becomes. They're all like 18 and 20.
Here's a dumb question: it's Sarah Northrop. Is she tied in with Northrop Grumman?
No, I looked that up. I don't think she was. I mean, yeah.
Well, I was thinking Rockets, and it's like
right, but it's just another name, I think. From what it could be wrong, but from what I've seen so far, I've never seen a connection between her and Northrop. But he might have thought so. I don't know. He hooks up with her, and he begins to borrow money from people so he can write all the time, and he gets into this groove of writing Dianetics, and he obviously on amphetamines. He writes it in 3 weeks, not unlike Jack Kerouac with On the Road. I mean, a lot of guys are doing this back then. Really, the only drug that's available is amphetamines. I mean, that's the common drug used by hipsters, writers, jazz musicians. I mean, heroin is not really permeated the American culture at that point, nor has cocaine by any stretch of imagination, but amphetamines are everywhere. So it is abused by a lot of people. And I think, it was abused by him, and then later alcohol, as depicted pretty well, by Philip Seymour Hoffman in the movie The Master that I recommend, by P.T. Anderson. The Master, he kept showing, this is a side thing, but he kept showing various cuts of The Master, which originally we had heard here in Hollywood was going to be extremely harsh on L. Ron Hubbard. And then we started to get reports, not so harsh, not so harsh, not so harsh. It turns out that Anderson kept showing various cuts to Tom Cruise, who then kept telling him to make, because he had worked with Cruise before, and I guess he didn't want to slit his own film throat. So Cruise, according to what everyone has said, kept saying, no, you got to cut this, you got to cut that, you got to cut this. So when The Master does come out, it's a watered down version of what we had heard was going to be the definitive movie on Scientology. It's a watchable, pretty good movie anyway. You know what I mean? I still recommend it, but it's not what everyone had hoped it would be. And of course, Philip Seymour Hoffman would later die of a heroin overdose himself. But there are some elements to see him portraying Hubbard that are interesting, because he did his own research. Obviously.
He's a brilliant actor too.
Yeah, he was great. But anyway, to digress back to where we were with Dianetics, he writes Dianetics in 3 weeks. He then gets the help of a guy named John Campbell, who tries to publish it and publishes it in one of his science fiction magazines, helps him with it. The book comes out in book form, and it goes to #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, selling thousands and thousands and thousands of copies. It has been talked about in the same vein as the hula hoop in terms of a fad. That's the size of Dianetics. There is nothing bigger in the history of publishing at that time than Dianetics, just in terms of book selling. In terms of book selling, there were rumors that people were buying 2 or 3, 10 copies, and the later Scientology would buy multiple copies. In 1950, none of that was true. Scientology did not exist. There was just people. It was the beginning, and this is hard to explain. So I will try to explain it as carefully as I can. It is the first self-help book in American history, if that makes any sense, Eric. It is the beginning of what we now know as the self-help book industry. It's the first book to ever do this. Now, what Hubbard does is he begins to set up these Dianetic clinics and lectures all around the country, and groups on their own, having nothing to do with Hubbard. And my uncle got it. My uncle did one. My uncle Louis told me, who his daughter ran Lou Reed's company, Beth, who ran the coffee shop on 42nd Street. Louis told me he did it. Everybody he knew did it back in 1950, 51. Every single person around that he knew was trying out Dianetics. And that, of course, had the E-meter. Now, you may have a photo of him with the E-meter there. The electropsychometer, what's known as the E-meter, is the electropsychometer. There might be a photo of him. There he is. There's the E-meter. The E-meter, which we're going to get into, is very, very important in the study of Scientology. It is a poor man's lie detector. It's a 1/3 of a lie detector. It doesn't have the heart. It doesn't have the breath, but it has the galvanic skin response. So it's really measuring with a needle your pulse and your response of your pulse going up and down. You hold these 2 electric cans, the cans that have 2 clips attached to them that are electric to the meter. And it used to be originally 2 Campbell soup cans, Eric, where they just peeled the label off of 2 Campbell soup cans.
We have a later picture of somebody holding the cans if you want to use it.
All right, jump ahead. We'll get there on Friday. There's a guy who's trying out the cans, and that's a modern day E-meter. There, you see that aqua-colored machine in the foreground. And if you could show the next picture, and you may see a book in the foreground.
That's with
that guy's name on it.
This one?
Yeah. So that book has all the secrets of John Travolta in Scientology, which we'll get into on Friday, more of a, because that's years later.
Right.
Back in 1950. But the point of the matter is,
those cans lasted. They're still used.
It's not a question of the cans. It's a question of them asking you questions that go into your file about all kinds of nasty things you may have done that you're trying to clear yourself and achieve clear. Clear is when the needle stops moving. And they'll say, all right, I'll just give you an example. Take us back to when you're 7 years old. What happened? Well, I can't remember anymore before 7. Well, what do you remember at 7? Well, I remember a barn. And they go, really? Okay, go through the door of the barn. Let's see what's in the barn. And then you go, okay, I'm inside the barn. Now what? Well, is my uncle there? He's got his pants down. You go, what? Yes. And you go, okay, so the needle's going, woo, woo, woo. So
there you go. Scrambling, taking notes. I mean, this goes right back to thought reform, and any good cult does this. Collects information.
Okay. Right. But this is not how it starts out. It starts out sweeping the nation like the hula hoop. This is not dark. It's not nefarious. Everybody's doing it. You're talking, first of all, Hubbard was an Eagle Scout, like all of these psychos. They're always an Eagle Scout, whether it's Charles Joseph Whitman in the Austin Tower. Everybody's an Eagle Scout. I don't know how that happens, but Hubbard was an Eagle Scout too. So, I mean, it starts out as a self-help thing for himself and for also the American people, who he feels are filled with, these engrams, and the engrams have to be eliminated, which is essentially, you could say, your childhood trauma. So there is some science to it. It's not completely crazy, but again, the book sells like hotcakes and makes him a millionaire overnight. He takes the money like a psycho and just goes crazy. And I mean crazy. He eventually loses the publishing rights to the book, which then the owner of the book was a millionaire who backed him up, files for bankruptcy, and Hubbard is now broke again. And oddly enough, a guy who should have been set for life spends all his money on things that nobody can even remember him. He didn't buy property. I don't know what he did with the money, but he ends up completely broke by 1953 in 3 years because he was such a psycho. And was an impoverished psycho that he just goes on a spending spree of unbelievable proportions.
Wow. That's a quick burn through.
He burned through it really quickly. And, I'm not talking about, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I don't know how he did it, but.
And that's the shameful part, right? Is at least.
Yeah, it is shameful. He should have done more with that money. But.
Exactly. I mean, it's like, if you're going to do it, it's got to be that party or something.
Right. Now keep in mind, Parsons is dead. So he comes back to LA in 1953 and he begins to come up with the idea for Scientology. It doesn't exist. There's a separate time for Scientology, and he begins to write these ideas down of a celebrity church, and to lure celebrities into a church, he creates the Celebrity Center in Hollywood and begins to reach out through letters to people like Groucho Marx and Rock Hudson. Yeah, that's me a little later. He didn't get me, but that's still there. That's the Celebrity Center on Franklin, pretty close by. But I'll tell you something really funny. There's a restaurant there's two stories, but there's a restaurant in there that nobody goes to. It's not a restaurant. It's a phony restaurant. And it's for the celebrities. If they ever wanted to eat there, they would bring in the food. So four people.
Catering.
For catering, yeah. But 4 people who were civilians, 2 of them were reporters, took their girlfriends and went to the Celebrity Center restaurant, making believe they were just coming in off the street and wanted to order food for lunch. So they scrambled. The people who worked there went across the street to the supermarket, brought back the stuff. The menu was ancient. And these people knew it was a phony restaurant. They wanted to write an article about it, which they did. And that was hysterical. But there was also the guy a couple of years ago who had lost his fortune buying courses in Scientology, lived up in Oregon, and vowed to get his money back from Scientology. And they kept taunting him. He would call up on the phone saying, I'm coming to get you. I want my money back. I spent $250,000 on this stupid bullshit. So they knew who he was. And he showed up one day, of course, with 2 samurai swords, as people will do, to get their money back. And the guys around the corner from where that photo was of me in the driveway just opened up and riddled him with bullets. He shows up with the 2 samurai swords. They riddle him with bullets, broad daylight. And the LAPD shows up and says, let's take a look at the cameras. So they look at the cameras and they go, okay, it looks good to us. They just move on. The guy had 2 samurai swords. They knew he was coming. He kept telling them he's coming, and they just opened fire and machine gunned him to death, the 2 guards who were at that.
Nothing to see here.
Nothing to see here, but I digress. Going back to him coming out here, he begins to formulate the plan of using celebrities as part of a church. And that is his brilliance. That is the brilliance of Scientology. However, he quickly begins to form membership and begins to charge $500 per person for these Dianetics courses. I mean, this is 1950s 500.
I was going to say, yeah. When was it? Okay, that's a lot of money.
1950, Eric.
That's like half a car.
That's $5,000, right?
Yeah, it's half a car back then.
Okay, yeah.
So I think a car is about $1,000 for.
So they're paying like $5,000. So the celebrities have money. So they begin doing it. Rock Hudson shows up, Groucho Marx shows up. Years later, even Jerry Seinfeld will show up.
Ding, 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 ding. Rock Hudson. Interesting.
Rock Hudson showed up. Yeah, it's kind of
there's something that Scientology was helping people with, and that was
he might have had some secrets that
a little therapy, though, that supposedly they were going to help, especially gays.
Well, in his literature, he says that it's a mental illness, just like the DSM did at that time. He doesn't speak any different than the Psychiatric Association did at that time, calling it a mental illness, which is what leads to Paul Haggis years later, after 30 years in the church, the director of $1 Million Baby and Crash. It leads to Paul Haggis leaving the church after 30 years because Haggis has 2 lesbian daughters and does not realize how anti-gay the church actually is, funding Proposition 8, which was on the California ballot here against gay marriage. Scientology put in a lot of money to defeat, to help Proposition 8 succeed. And he didn't know this, Haggis. And this leads to Haggis writing a letter saying, what's the deal with our anti-gay literature? And they tell him to rip up the letter, don't do this. And he becomes a suppressive person, an SP. He leaves the church and disconnects. And he said he never went online. They discouraged him from going online. He goes online, begins reading every negative thing he could find about the church. And it blows his mind. People, it's interesting because nobody knows what these guys get out of the church. Nobody knows what's in it for them. Haggis talks about, and just to digress about Haggis for a second, Haggis talks about getting to theta level 7. 8 is the highest. He gets to like 6 or 7. And they take him into a room and they open up a briefcase, and in there are the handwritten writings of L. Ron Hubbard. So apparently once you get up the bridge, 8 is the highest, by the way, operating Thetan level, OT level 8. At 8, which is the highest, which is what Travolta and Cruz are, they say you have superpowers. You can read people's minds. You have telepathy. You can heal through the power of touch. You can move furniture or small objects on a table. There's a bunch of different claims about. Is that Haggis?
Yeah.
Okay, that's an early Haggis. This must have been the time he quit. So Haggis, by the way, is going to go to trial in October in New York for raping 3 women. So I don't know if this is revenge against Haggis or what, but they almost got him in Italy this summer. The judge threw out the case saying it was consensual sex, but he's in October of this year. He will be standing trial in October, which we're gonna focus on at some point, see what's going on with that trial. But Haggis says he reads the origin story. The origin story is taken out of a briefcase, presented to him in a room where you can't take it with you, you can't copy it, you can't do anything. You just got to read this. And he reads the story and he thinks maybe he's supposed to say that it's completely insane or he's going to get kicked out of the church, because he reads it and just goes, who the hell is going to believe this crap? And he's just stunned that he's paid millions of dollars. In 1 month, he gives them $250,000 in 1 month. So he says, this is the craziest thing I've ever read. Now, let me tell you what he read. He read this story that there is a parallel Earth set in the 1950s where they dress like us in the 1950s, drive 1950s cars, and live a 1950s type of life. Unfortunately for them, there is a tax collector, and they have to at some point all go and see the tax collector. Now, Hubbard hated tax collectors far more than he hated psychiatrists. Nothing is more hated, and we're going to get into that, about their battle with the IRS. But okay, so in this parallel Earth, you go to the tax collector. Thousands of people go in there, and you're laid out on a slab where you're injected with glycol into your heart, freezing you. Then these thousands of bodies are loaded in caskets aboard B-52 bombers that look like B-52 bombers, thousands of caskets. They're flown over volcanoes on the real Earth, our Earth, dropped into active volcanoes, and then hydrogen bomb. Are you following this, Hunley? Hydrogen
Barely.
bombs are then dropped into the volcano, sealing the volcano with the bodies in the volcano. The Thetans then escape from the volcano and enter the bodies of newborn babies on the real Earth, which is your soul. And the Thetans that are in your soul, there could be thousands of these Thetans in there, and the engrams are in there. And anyway, make a long story short.
So how stoned was he when he wrote this shit?
Right, that's the point. I mean, there's elements of these stories. If you trace back into his Pulp Fiction, you will see traces of this in various magazine articles and Pulp Fiction magazines that he writes and his short stories. So it doesn't come out of whole cloth. He's, taking from his own science fiction writings and created this origin myth. And Haggis reads this and he says, I think it's a test to see if I will say that this is insane. And he doesn't know whether to say it's insane or to make believe he believes it, to continue on in the church. So he says, I got to get out of here. And then this is the beginning of the end of Haggis, because it later leads to his two gay daughters. And that was another aspect of it. But the origin story that he reads really triggers him as to just being unbelievable. Now, for some reason, all of these other people believe the story. And that's what I wanted to say.
Or they all fell on the side of, I'm not going to say shit. Are you going to say shit?
Well, we don't know. We don't know. We don't know. That's a good question.
And they all narc on each other anyway. So you can't really go to the other ones. Hey, Mark, did that say what I think it said? They're not allowed to talk with each other.
Well, keep in mind, if you ever do want to leave, you are confronted with your e-meter journals where you said I had sex with a sheep when I was 16 and I was in the, Spanish Civil War or whatever in my fantasy or something.
Mm-hmm. And they even encourage you to be even more forthcoming, because that's the beauty of cults. It's like, even if you run out of material, you're like, well, I mean, NXIVM had a little bit of it. It's like, well, maybe you can come up with some things about your parents.
Talking to
maybe
a friend
come up with some extra things.
We both agreed that pound for pound, greatest cult of all time is Scientology. Monetarily, numerically, every single metric that you and I or we would use to measure the importance and lifelong ability of a cult. No cult comes, not the Moonies, not Jim Jones, which imploded. No cult has ever reached the heights that this one has and is still going. Now, this guy who told me this, when he was homeless, he went in to the Celebrity Center. He wasn't a celebrity then, but he is now. He wasn't a celebrity then, and it said free sandwich, right? So he goes in to get the free sandwich, and they start putting the bite on him, no pun intended, about taking classes. But he's a homeless guy, so he doesn't have any money. He just wants the sandwich. So they keep saying, yeah, the sandwich is coming. The sandwich is coming. Don't worry about it. Meanwhile, one person after another comes in like a sales pitch, tagging the next guy to convert him to Scientology. Now, keep in mind, if you don't have the money for these classes, you're going to end up in the Sea Org, which gets us back to the ship that Hubbard was on, that you showed in the Granada TV segment. Okay, the Sea Org is because he owes taxes in the United States. He goes and lives at sea with these two ships that he gets, these broken down ships, and he gets these kids to come on board with them. They become the original Sea Organization. They become his most loyal paramilitary group, the Sea Org.
His slave labor.
What's that?
His slave labor.
Right. They're not just slave labor, but they're his cult following who worship him. And he also forms a band called Hubbard and the Apollos, by the way. It's a very minor story that nobody realizes, that he has a special affectation for musicians, as we'll later see with Chick Corea, Edgar Winter, Isaac Hayes. Musicians tend to flock to this thing. And he tries to get musicians at the beginning, but I guess a bunch of them didn't bite on it. But anyway, he's at sea with the Sea Organization. And if you could show that picture that I showed you of Miscavige in full uniform with his followers of the Sea Org for Friday's episode, there's a picture of them decked out in their Sea Org outfits with Miscavige as the new Commodore. We're going to get into Miscavige next week, later this week, as the Sea Org guy. Look at that. Okay, this is their Sea Org. This comes from
A few Commodore. Good men.
Yes, this comes from the Commodore himself, from Elron, who dressed this way with his men and women, the Sea Org. So when he's out at ship, these people are not the ones who have money for these $500 auditing sessions. These are the ones who have no money. He takes them in and gives them, yeah, dude, it's just a classic photo. I think that's from the late 90s, actually, of Miscavige down in front there. Some of the other guys are in the back, which we'll get into. Marty Rathbun and Mike Rinder, two of the spokespeople for the church, who later turned against the church and spoke out. Tommy Davis, I think, has recently moved to Austin, Texas. I think he's left. But the Sea Organization under Hubbard was his group, his paramilitary group on the two ships. And they worshiped him to no end. They became the original, members of the cult of Hubbard. And they were very valuable to him in terms of starting to have a following, Eric. And even to this day, the Sea Org is treated like dirt. They're paid like 5 cents an hour to do labor, or 50 cents an hour. And this ends up at one point going, and Barnes will love this, and we'll get into this on Friday maybe. It ends up going to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals about child labor laws and paying them. They were using children and they were paying people 50 cents an hour. And the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that you joined this church, all bets are off. You don't have any rights anymore. And everything disappeared. The FBI harassing them, all of this stuff disappeared because of that Ninth Circuit ruling. And it was something like Headway versus Scientology or something. It was one of the members who sued over the fact that she was not paid a living wage and blah, 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 child labor laws and stuff like that. And the Ninth Circuit said, nope, you joined a cult or a church, you could leave whenever you want. And that was a very famous ruling. I'll have to look it up. Maybe we could post it on Locals, the court case itself, because it was a landmark case in terms of how they could treat their own people like shit. And that's why it's important. And they double down. They put people in the hole out at Hemet for years. This guy, Heber Jench, who ostensibly was their figurehead president, he was put into the hole for 7 years. And of course, as you pointed out before we started off camera, Shelley Miscavige, who was in the hole also for multiple years. You know, his own wife went into the hole.
We don't know where she is.
We don't know, but we know where Heber Jench was. He was in the hole for 7 years. This is when Miscavige takes over. When Hubbard dies in 1986, there's some pictures of Hubbard you could show at the end here, a series of photos where in the 80s he begins to go completely insane and lives in a ranch in a trailer where he's kind of a prisoner. Yeah, there he is. That's like early 80s Hubbard.
This is my favorite, though.
But this is my favorite. This is really at the end. This is complete madness of Hubbard, where he's just completely insane at this point. But he's typing out books anyway. You know, he doesn't stop writing these books. And they kind of keep him as a prisoner on a ranch in the desert. You know what I mean? He's not going to go anywhere anyway, but they kind of like have enough people feeding him and treating him, you know, like a celebrity. And they just have this guy on ice while they consolidate power and begin to grow as an organization. Now, in the 70s, yeah, see that guy in the foreground in the white shirt, the young kid, that's David Miscavige. And this is Hubbard above making a movie. And Miscavige is one of his underling, followers, and I think it's him at like 14, McCavish. So he's already under the tutelage of Hubbard. Oh, there it is. Headley, Betty Boop. Thank you. Headley versus Church of Scientology. Thank you, Betty. That famous case let them treat their people like shit. But this is a shot of McCavish as a young boy, already under the tutelage of the Sea Org. They were really big on making films and TV shows and media, and they set it up at Hemet. Hemet is like a media center. It's got the state-of-the-art recording studios, audio books, Eric, that you'd love. You could get the Dianetics audiobook, Hunley, and just listen to that all day.
Or not.
There's Hemet. Yeah, there's the Hemet compound. That's in those mountains in the back. The top of the screen up there is where the vault, buried deep inside that mountain range, are the original texts from Hubbard. And this Hemet Gold Base, as it's called, is a place where Tom Cruise would take his girlfriends and different things, where he would bond with them out there in a cottage and have all these slaves around him waiting on him. Him and McCavish kind of bonded. They had the same motorcycles. They dressed alike. They became best bros for a long time.
Yeah, that'll be on Friday, right?
That'll be on Friday. But yeah, going backwards a little bit where we were leaving off in the 70s, they begin to realize they get an IRS bill. This is hard to imagine, for $1 billion in back taxes from the IRS. And Hubbard realizes that if we do not get nonprofit religious status from the IRS, that we're done, because we don't have the $1 billion to pay them. That'll bankrupt us. And the IRS doesn't care, because they haven't paid taxes since 1952. So it adds up.
And they like to invest in real estate too. So they had a lot
of not at that time.
That was Miscavige. Okay. All right,
that's years later. In the 1970s, he owes $1 billion in back taxes to the IRS. And they create something which is one of the greatest stories in the history of cults, called Operation Snow White. And Operation Snow White, if anybody out there is a listener knows what I'm talking about, it's one of the greatest stories. Should be a movie by itself. Operation Snow White. They take 7,000 to 8,000 Scientologists and infiltrate every level of the United States government. This is including the IRS, the FDA, the Coast Guard intelligence, the FBI, the American Medical Association, separately, not a branch of the government, but they infiltrate every single agency that is out to get them by getting menial jobs within these agencies and then stealing the documents regarding themselves from the agencies and planting phony stories in the computers. In 1974, Operation Snow White. And they begin to fight back against the IRS as no organization in the history of the United States has ever done. The closest thing you could ever come up with would be the Weather Underground, and some of their techniques. But this, through completely legitimate means, they would get a job as a secretary or a guard, and they infiltrated all of these organizations legitimately by getting menial jobs and then stealing the stuff while they were on the jobs, copying the keys, getting their people inside at night, copying IRS badges so they could have IRS IDs. Dude, they copied the federal court IDs to get into federal courts. It's an astounding operation that allowed them to even wiretap the IRS when they were having a hearing as to the nonprofit status of the Church of Scientology, which was plugged in the room where they were meeting the IRS to discuss the nonprofit status, transmitted on FM frequency. They sat across the street in a car in the parking lot of the Smithsonian, listening to the IRS and recording it and sending it back to the base in LA, the actual recording. So their lawyers would know how to fight the IRS in court, bro. Think about, and then going in and stealing the documents and copying them from the Congressional Library they broke into. I mean, It's the biggest internal break-in. It makes Watergate look like a one-shot deal, which it was. This went on for months and months and months until some librarian catches them and calls the FBI. The FBI shows up and says, let's see some ID. In the middle of the night, they're in the Congressional Library, and they show them their ID from the IRS, right? And the guy lets them go, but the FBI files a report saying something's going on here. Okay. The IRS is the FBI shows up over here on Franklin with the biggest raid in the history of the FBI. 156 FBI agents for 23 consecutive hours with tractor trailers hauling away documents from the Scientology offices here right by me. Okay. No. This has never been broken, this record by the FBI. 156 federal agents going through everything with a search warrant. They then go to court, Scientology, and they have a court judge overturn the warrant, saying it was too broad. But the appellate court reinstates the warrant, saying it's not too broad. They take it to the Supreme Court. This is
was it there?
No, it was down at the Celebrity Center, the other place.
Okay.
Yeah, that's closer to me now. That was a hospital, and now it's Big Blue. But the Celebrity Center is really more of a base. So, and that's a little further down. Okay, so it goes to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court refuses to hear the case, goes back to the appellate level where they say the warrant stands. Okay, the FBI and the Justice Department convict the top 11 Scientologists in the church, including Hubbard's wife, Mary Hubbard, and they sentence them to federal prison. Hubbard, for some reason, gets an unindicted co-conspirator status, and all of these 11 are convicted, make a plea deal. They were facing 10 years. They pled it down. They fought it tooth and nail with all their Scientology attorneys to no avail. They had them dead to rights. They had done everything in Operation Snow White, including these sub-operations called Operation Cat, where Operation Cat was my favorite, because you'll love this, Hunley. They would break into the computers and plant phony intel information into the computers of the FBI and the IRS and other organizations, including the Coast Guard intelligence, about a cat that was a real intelligence cat, and it was a pussy cat. And they said this cat was spying, and they were trying to ridicule, what they were doing was trying to ridicule the intelligence services and embarrass them, and that they would hopefully release a press release.
I guess they're not completely evil.
Oh, no. They were brilliant and had senses of humor. Oh, no.
I'm kind of having to give a little bit.
Oh, no. I give them a lot of credit for this. I mean, this is a time in 1974 where the people on the left, at least, hated the FBI and hated the CIA. This was when the Church Committee was going full bore in 1974. This is when the IRS was despised. And these guys knew that they could use this for public sentiment, which is what their goal was, to get the public sentiment on their side, saying that they needed a tax-exempt status to save the church. The war itself, which we're going to get into on Friday, goes on until the mid-90s, when they finally defeat the IRS and get tax-exempt status. This war does not end with them going to federal prison. This war is just beginning with Operation Snow White. They do not buckle. They realize that getting that tax-exempt status. Now, keep in mind, this is an organization which has no schools, no religious hospitals, no deity, no priests, no nothing, Eric. It's really a self-help group that now is declaring itself a religion. Okay? So, I mean, this is not, like some other religions that we know, which are sketchy. This really has no connection to anything religious. You know what I mean? There's no services on Sunday, Eric. It's basically a Ponzi scheme, working your way up the bridge, paying more and more money to be revealed more and more inside information. I mean, whatever you want to call it,
That's why it's so powerful.
whether it works or not. And I believe for a lot of people, it works. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of truth in this thing.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people have gotten a lot of benefits out of this church, but it is a cult. It is abusive. When we're talking about fair game, which we'll get into on Friday, the ideological defense that he came up with is called fair game. Anyone who attacks the church has to be destroyed. Not just you accept the blows or you have to physically destroy them. And that becomes the fair game doctrine that they now distance themselves from. But there's plenty of people out there who would dispute that fair game has ever been done away with. And that includes Marty Rathman and his wife and Mike Rinder and Leah Remini, who obviously has had a lot of success with outing a lot of the crazy crap that's been going on with the church in the past 20, 30 years. Remini became one of their tough nemesises that they couldn't really defeat.
I think in technology and time, because they rose to prominence pre-internet, and it's a lot easier to control message and to control information. But now, what was it? I forgot who it was. It was like, might have been Miscavige's father. When he left, as he put it, he learned everything through Amazon Kindle, because they gave him a Kindle with all the Scientology books on it, so he could read. It's convenient. It's all in the Kindle, except they didn't realize that it had internet capability. And so he just started to read other stuff, like bulletin boards and things. So it's really hard to keep the message out.
Their membership has never been lower, but their wealth has never been higher. They have $3 billion, over $3 billion in assets right now. And their membership may be down to 25,000. They say it's millions, but in reality, it may be as low as it's ever been. But they now have power within a small cadre of leaders and assets of over $3 billion. They own every building in Hollywood over here on Hollywood Boulevard. And their assets are all around the world. And in a weird way, it's the Catholic Church without any membership, if you follow my analogy, because even though the Catholic membership may be diminishing, there's still millions and millions and millions of Catholics.
Sure.
Right. Okay. Well, this does not have millions and millions and millions of Scientologists any longer.
No, it's a great spot to be in if you just want to sit on the funds. I mean,
right. But what are they doing with these funds is the real question. I mean, what is their purpose? We're gonna have to look into this in episode 2, Scientology, The Reckoning, because these celebrities who are in there so deeply, like Travolta and Cruz and Giovanni Ribisi and some of these other people, they seem to get something out of it. Beck and Marissa. I mean, there's a lot of people now, including like Sheriff Baca, who just got out of prison, the Scientology sheriff from Los Angeles, who protected them here for so many years. The next episode, we're going to get into more in the 90s, what begins to happen under the rule of David Miscavige, which some people believe this thing's not going to end until Miscavige passes away. I think he's in his early 60s now, and he refuses to give interviews. He will not talk or do any press or anything. They really have the face of the organization is now, according to everyone, is Tom Cruise. Yeah, he's the face of the organization. I mean, even Travolta does not talk that much about it, but Cruise is totally gung ho and at the top of his game. Again,
Cruise could take over.
He could take over himself, right?
Yeah, that's all I'm saying. He's so well known and locked in with that thing that.
Right. Well, there was an acting coach, an acting teacher here in Hollywood who would funnel these kids to Scientology and get 10% of whatever they took in as an acting coach. He was a legitimate acting coach. I forget his name. Maybe Betty Boop knows his name, but he would funnel these guys and girls to Scientology from the classes, legitimate acting classes. And, people worked. I mean, Barry Pepper, if you look at Giovanni Ribisi and Barry Pepper, they always work in twos. Remember this. Any movie you see about Scientology, they never go alone. It's always a pair. And if you see a Scientologist in a movie, ask yourself, who's the other Scientologist? It's a fun game we play. It's a fun game. So, getting back to the guy who goes in for the sandwich, maybe we could end with this. He continues to ask for the sandwich. They go, look, we don't have any sandwiches. We don't do that anymore. They take him from the Celebrity Center in a bus to Big Blue over here, the hospital, the one you showed in the picture. And they said, they have sandwiches there. So he says, okay, now we're getting somewhere. They go, yeah, they have a whole restaurant there. You'll get plenty of sandwiches. And, we just want to talk to you about this e-meter reading and see if you want to sign up for classes. And he goes, yeah, after I get the sandwich, I think I could talk more intelligently to you about, because he wants the food, right? So they put him in a room at Big Blue, and they keep turning over to the next guy, and they're getting nowhere with this guy. And finally, they bring in some cookies. He told me they brought in a plate of cookies, and he ate all the cookies, right? Really quickly, just he's starving, ate all the cookies. So, but he's not giving up on the demand for the sandwich. So the guy leaves, the cookie guy leaves, and for one brief second, nobody is with him. And he opens the door and he looks down, and this is like The Shining, that Big Blue. That place is enormous with hallways that are like 500 yards long, like 5 football fields. It's huge. And he looks to the left. Yeah, you see this? This is where he was. He looks to the left, he looks to the right, and starts going down the hallway. And all of a sudden, all of the doors start open, and there's guys with walkie-talkies going, he's on the run, he's on the run. And they start chasing him, and he begins running down the hallways, and door after door opens, and 15 guys are chasing him down the hall, trying to get him before he gets out of Big Blue. And he comes out of that front door that you showed, and he runs down to Sunset, right here. He runs down those stairs, and right in front is Sunset Boulevard, and he sees a city bus at the bus stop, and he has no shoes on, and he's running down to the bus, being chased by about 8 of them in white shirts and ties, and he jumps onto the bus, and there's a black old guy who's the bus driver with an unlit stogie in his mouth, and he closes the door, and he sees them coming for him, and the black guy, as he pulls out, turns around and says, they almost got you, didn't they, boy? They almost got you. And that's our episode for today.
All right. Well, we got a couple super chats here.
Right on.
Thank you very much. Scientology leader David Miscavige is 5'1" and has now disappeared his wife of Shelley for 15 years.
That's right.
I wonder if she's been disappeared longer than they were together.
I don't know how they get away with it legally, because
it's weird.
It's a strange thing. He's 5'1". Yeah, he looks shorter than Tom Cruise when you see a picture of him with Tom Cruise.
Well, that's why he gets along with Tom Cruise, probably.
Yeah, those photos together. Would you have a photo of them together? Did I give you one of those? Or?
Yeah, we'll do it on Friday.
Oh, all of a sudden everything's on Friday now.
Well, it's a tease, man.
Oh, this is my friend from Texas.
Yep, and I got to get back with you, by the way. I did get your email. I've marked it as unread to catch up and get with you.
I don't remember as
Aaron Levin Smith. Okay,
I have anybody on. Nobody's coming on. That's it. It's just me and Hunley, bro.
I've had Doug Kramer on my channel.
Fog,
Yeah, I've had Doug Kramer on my channel. I've had John Atuk on my channel. Right. So I've got some interviews out there if you want to check out some of the folks.
Pasha, what do you think, bro?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pasha. Got invited in, yeah. Well, Friday's episode is going to be 10 times better. I just wanted to do the intro stuff. We'll get into Friday. You'll see some mind-blowing crap that I've learned over the years, and it involves me personally on Friday. So if you like the Mooney episode, you're going to like Friday. I didn't want Hunley to tip the scales because that'll be more on Friday of my involvement. Let it be told that I did not sit idly by.
But there is a concern. I saw earlier on Twitter that they've got Oswald.
They do?
Apparently.
They're going to come from me. Don't you? They don't care about that stuffed dog, bro. They care about me and my big mouth. I'm now going to be harassed for years.
Well, folks, remember to support us. Locals.
What about subscribing, Hunley? What about that button you push, about the red button?
There's a crazy button that's just below. And to quote Uncivil Law, if it's red, it's sad. So what you want to do is get rid of the red. Well, Visine the button.
The button.
Yeah, click it and get the red out. And
now on locals, we could put up some documents that I have, some stuff on Scientology that in my files, because I've got stuff too. There's stuff in my files that are just crazy. I mean, well, I'll show you on Friday, but I've been collecting stuff on them for, I want to say 30 years. I mean, but I just got this in the mail. I wanted to thank everyone. Look at this. This is bigger than the General Walker book. This
Good
is
Lord.
from the PayPal book fund. This book is the second best book on LBJ involved with the Kennedy assassination. I mean, it's $75 out of print. And I got to thank everyone on PayPal who sent me, incremental amounts of money to buy this particular book, which I had on Kindle, but it's a pain in the ass to do research on Kindle, despite what David Miscavige's father did. I can't do that. And I've been putting it off because the book is so damn expensive. But thank you, everyone in locals and whoever funded the PayPal book fund. This you could probably get for 75 cents. So that's an easy buy. But the books like Noel Twyman's book, which I really recommend if you want to get into the weeds on LBJ, the book, obviously Mastermind of the Assassination, LBJ is great. This is the second greatest book. And this one's out of print.
And we actually got a shout out from the Mastermind of the Assassination.
Oh, Phil Nelson. Yeah, Philip Nelson. Absolutely. And, maybe people when we go down to Dallas, we're going to meet with a guy named Robert Morrow, who is the world's leading expert on LBJ regarding the assassination. Rob Morrow knows where all the bodies are buried. Put it that way. He's a little nutty, but man, is he accurate.
That might be a locals only exclusive.
That might be an exclusive with Rob Morrow. I think he took over at one point in a incredible coup d'etat. He took over the Republican Party of Austin, Texas, at one point a couple of years ago, because when nobody was paying attention. And the rhinos,
members.
What's that?
Both members. It can't be that.
No, whatever it was, he took over the party. And the rhinos freaked out. The country club Republican Texans in Austin flipped the fuck out over this guy. I don't know if he's still the president of the Republican Party, but interrogation technique, there are some things people would do for gingerbread cookies that they would do. I'm just saying.
Well, if your friend happened to go into the building again, maybe they were using the technique with the cookies to keep them.
Yeah, I mean, he got away. He barely got out alive. I mean, they were going to keep him in there, and who knows what have happened to him.
Wow. And
if you've lived here long enough, which I have, I've been in Hollywood for 30 years, you have heard and experienced and seen some of the craziest crap. And I lived and worked with the Moonies. When I went to Bard, the Moonies were right there, and I had a girlfriend who joined the Moonies and some other stuff that we did in the Mooney episode, which I recommend. If you like this one, go back and look at the episode Eric and I did on the Unification Church, because that's the second most successful cult operation in the United States and in the world, was the Moonies. And then I stumbled into this thing here with these guys, which you're going to find out on Friday, which is kind of hair-raising.
Yeah, the Moonies might be the most successful in the world. The Scientology definitely in the U.S. Moonies, though, because there's so much international. I did not
international Scientology. They're in every country in the world.
I know, but I'm saying that even the prime minister or deputy prime minister who was just killed was tied to the Mooney. There's got a lot of
they don't have the star power that Scientology has. They really don't.
Not the star power, but the power. Anyway, Shazam.
Shazam.
That's a big Shazam.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
This is not my cup. This is my purple cup. But
no, it's not the highly customized purple cup.
It's not the customized purple cup that everybody wants that I made. And what is this one? Oh, is this guy's name? Fia what?
Oh, it's a Fixed Pedal Boards.
Fixed Pedal Boards. All right. People have the craziest names.
Hey, thank you very much.
I did get a haircut, by the way, but nobody seems to give a crap. They only care when my hair is out of control. They don't give a crap. That Christy from Beverly Hills came over and did this, and just want to give her a shout out, a friend of the show.
Awesome. Well, Friday we're going to wrap everything up. Everybody, if you want, check out Locals. we'll try to put some stuff up there in between now and
Can we
Friday.
put some links of videos down below of Miscavige and not use them on the show? You know, because of the copyright. I don't want to violate their copyright.
Yeah, we can always do that. Yeah. And we can also put links in there.
There's one that I really want where they announce that they've won the war against Scientology, and it's with fireworks, and it's in one of their centers.
You mean the IRS?
The IRS. They have a giant rally about this. Apply this the next day. Well, it's going to take a little bit more than that, but I'm putting it in the cookie jar. I'm putting it in the cookie jar. It grows pretty quick. The girl will be back in 4 weeks, but yeah, I mean, if we could put some videos down below, I don't think we're in violation of any.
No, I can put a link to anything.
Links, okay, links. That's what I meant. Yeah. As you say, you're the guy with ExpressVPN, so you know everything about this crap.
That's right.
I'm just a boomer Luddite from another generation that was analog, and now it's become digital.
And watching the analog disappear.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, folks, unstructured.locals.com to see some of the content we'll try to upload.
Right.
Mark's got a PayPal fund. That's down below. Yep. You can always follow Mark at Lord Buckley on Twitter.
Depending on my mood, you could be blocked at any moment. So.
Oh, somebody cracked me up saying that.
Sometimes I'm just in a bad mood. I'll block my mother if I have to. I don't give a crap who it is. Don't take it personally.
Apparently, you have Oswald blocking people now too.
Yeah, it's spread like wildfire. Now people follow me. They're blocking other people. Nobody wants to negotiate with terrorists on this. People are tired of being told what to do, I think, in general. If people don't, I'm looking for like-minded people. I don't need you to tell me that, you think my review of the Hunter Biden film is wrong because you want to waste $21 on that piece of shit. But if you find that you don't like what I'm writing, just don't follow me, please. I beg you. I'm not in this for the numbers.
And by the way, you can find me out there.
Yeah, Hunley, you can follow Hunley all day. He'll never block you.
I won't block you, but I also am not intervening if Mark blocks you.
Yeah, stop crying, you bitches, to Hunley. Stop going to him, you whiny bitches.
I sit there and
accept your fate as a blocked person.
What do you want me to do? Is my answer.
Eric, Mark blocked me. Please help me. I don't even know what I did.
See everybody Friday.
Okay, bye-bye.